Who am I speaking to?
So, is everybody in?
Yes, yes, Aris, thank you.
Good morning from Paros Island in Greece. We are here for the Engaging Communities in Cultural Heritage Summer School. Yesterday was our final day with presentations by the participants, the community of the island. Just a few words before we begin about the summer school. It is a summer school that has been going on for several years now, starting in Crete, on the mountains community of Gonies, in central Crete. And now it has migrated to Paros for the last, I think, 4 years, some of which were online because of the pandemic. But right now we are in the field.
Third year in person.
Third year in person. The philosophy of the summer school is to allow participants to come in contact with the issues, with the questions, with the practice of working with communities in real time, so in the field, which is something that we believe is very difficult to teach by just teaching, and you have to see for yourself. So this is the idea and the goal of this summer school, to expose participants to the whole spectrum of reactions when working with local communities in a safe and protected environment, of course. We're very happy to have this event as a closing event for our summer school. And we thank you very much for joining us today. So, Len?
So today we have with us Alexander Sandy Colvin, who's a dear colleague we had met many, many years ago in an interpretive writing seminar in Greece, and it was a really engaging, nice week. So Sandy is the project manager and coordinator of the EMPATHS research project, for which he is going to talk about very shortly. And he also collaborates with Interpret Europe. And I think both the content and the aim of our summer school with the whole philosophy and the case studies that Sandy will present on behalf of the Empath Project, they somehow meet. And I guess that's why we're all here. So thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, no, we did not introduce ourselves.
We did not introduce ourselves, no. Again. Okay, so this is Aris Anagностopoulos. He's a doctor, anthropologist and historian.
And this is Dr. Lena Stefanou, who's an archaeologist and museologist.
And together we direct and deliver and design and run the summer school with the precious help and coordination of Fotini and Stelina and Rula and Maria, and our director is here. So it's quite a big team behind it. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Lena and Aris. And thank you very much for inviting me to be with you this morning. It's funny, really. Just your experience you just described there made me think of a job in a previous life, quite some years ago, when I used to work for a French NGO, environmental heritage NGO, and I was in charge of a program of European voluntary service projects and campuses where we enabled young people, often university graduates, to go and spend 6 months in countries like Greece, for example. You take a Spanish student and maybe an English student, and they would spend 6 months with a local community working on a local community project. So gaining precious practical experience and putting into practice some of the things that they had learned during the course. So it was what you're doing there on Paros is actually quite similar. You're almost a bit like a kind of hit squad for the local community, and it's incredible what can be achieved in a very short space of time when you have that many people together, bringing all of the different skills and disciplines. So you're really a sort of, multidisciplined squad that can actually cover an awful lot of work in a very short time. So it's really good that, and I hope that some of the stakeholders on Paros appreciate the time and energy that you put in over the last week or so during the summer school. And I heard that it went pretty well yesterday when you gave your final presentation of your findings. So, as Lena said, my name's Sandy Colvine, and I'm Scottish origin. I live in France now, just to sort of mix you up a little bit. And I work for Interpret Europe because I coordinate the EMPATHS project, but I'm also a member of Interpret Europe way back when Lena, actually when I first met Lena on a writing course. And I'm a trainer for Interpret Europe, and I teach interpretive guiding and interpretive writing now in many places around Europe. Sadly, not in France so much, but France is, as the sort of number one tourist destination, there's a kind of perhaps a mindset of, well, it works, so why change it? But many other places are looking to differentiate themselves and mark themselves out. And that's where interpretation can really come in. Anyway, that's another story. What we're here today for is I prepared a short presentation. Hopefully, I won't speak for too long, maybe sort of 30 to 40 minutes or so. And that leaves time for some exchange. And it would be really good if we can have an exchange on some of the points that I want to share with you from that are really like hot off the press from our online training, which I think may echo with you and your experiences either within the summer school or elsewhere. But we will have some time for an exchange after I finish. So what I want to talk about is to give you a little insight into the EMPATHS project. What is it? What's it all about? What are we trying to do? And then try to build some bridges between that project and the importance of the contribution of local communities, which is what you've experienced all week and what we hope to experience in the later stages of EMPATHS. So I'll share some slides. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, good. There are no videos embedded or anything like that, so it should work fairly seamlessly. Okay, so the EMPATHS project. EMPATHS is an acronym, as you can see, for Empowering Landscapes with Participatory Approaches to Heritage Interpretation Skills. It's quite a mouthful, but fortunately we've got a nice acronym. And EMPATHS also makes us think of empathy, which is about understanding and sharing feelings with of others. So that's really the spirit of EMPATHS. It's a 30-month project funded by the Erasmus Plus program. So it's what we're trying to do here is put together a vocational training program that reflects the shift in personal meaning making, where people are encouraged to interpret the value and meaning heritage has for themselves. And in doing so, it's apparent that many heritage professionals are not well equipped to facilitate that process, where once they were the reference for meaning making themselves. So there's also a wider agenda for the project that we want to offer vocational education and training providers a new training method where there's greater awareness of participatory heritage interpretation for projects or initiatives focused on civic participation and community development. So making heritage relevant to those areas. So we want to kind of reach out not only to heritage professionals, but also to sectors that are not so apparently well connected with heritage. But heritage can be used, particularly in community development projects. So what is EMPATHS in concrete terms? Well, we have 3 pilot heritage management organizations, and they're dotted on the map there, as you can see. We have, they're also in very different settings. We have a cross-border geopark on the Austrian-Slovenian border. We have an archaeological park on the edge of a very large urban basin in Naples. And then we have the Ethnological Museum of Thrace as our Greek partner, and representing a more sort of sparsely populated area of Greece. With those 3 heritage organization partners, they are paired with technical and training partners. So that includes Interpret Europe, Heritage, and in Italy, an organization called The Story Behind. So we also have associate partners in the other countries, and these comprise various management organizations. So we're informing them and also gaining contributions from them. Now, where are we actually with the project? Because, as I said, it's 30 months, but we've been going for a little while now. And we started the first of 3 phases back in 2025, early 2025, researching what already exists, because participation isn't necessarily new, and we're not breaking new ground as such, but we're building on perhaps what exists already. So we conducted some case study mapping, some stakeholder mapping, interviews with heritage and non-heritage sectors on participatory methods, because it's really important that we also learn from other professionals who don't work in heritage about how they manage and facilitate participatory methods. We also consulted with specialists, consultants who produce interpretive plans and strategies. And that culminated in a methodological framework, which is basically the nuts and bolts of the project, so that we could move to the next phase, which is developing it. And in that development phase, one of the key results was the EMPATHS manifesto, which sets out the case for the project and the actors involved. And then we drafted a curriculum and materials for the online training and on-site training, and I'll come to that a little bit later. But there's 2 parts to the training that we're testing here, online and on-site. And I think perhaps some of you have been involved as participants in the online training organized by Heritage in association with EMT. So I've been doing exactly the same at the same time in the Geopark in Slovenia and Austria. So the project is centered on a participatory roadmap there, but more about that in the middle, in the later part of the presentation. The training itself involves an online section, which has 6 sections, 6 sessions rather, totaling around about 10 hours of lectures, exercises, and exchange. Quite a lot of discussion about the principles of participatory practices. You will obviously know that yourselves with some of the participants here online, and we are coming to the end of that process. We'll finish our session 6 on Monday, and I think that'll be the same with you in Greece. Then we will move on in September to putting some of these principles into practice with what we call community labs. And there will be one in Thrace, and there will be one in the Geopark, for instance, and one at the Archaeological Park in Naples. So that can be on tangible or in intangible heritage in the pilot areas. And the beneficiaries are not necessarily all heritage professionals or heritage interpreters. For instance, we have a school teacher amongst the participants in our online sessions. The community lab itself is the really interesting part. It's 5 days of a really living experience here. It's not a sort of clinical exercise. It's quite dynamic, and we're going to use a design thinking approach. So where we, over the 5 days, will work with the local community to go through the different stages of the approach of empathizing, defining, putting ideas, concrete ideas into practice, developing a kind of prototype, if you like, and then reflection and evaluation at the end. It's going to be quite an intense process, but it's really it's the process that counts. A little less the focus on the results. The idea is that we hope to produce interpretive narratives, themes, and ideas for interpretive services on the site that we will use for the community lab, and that the community and pilot partners might progress after the action finishes. Now, we can't explore everything in 5 days, just as we can't explore everything in depth in the online sessions in the space of 10 hours. It's really sort of dipping your toe in, but it's a really useful experience. So we hope from that, as I said, it's a living experience, so that it's the process of participation that counts most, not necessarily the cast iron certainty of achieving a predetermined result, like a trail or a panel or an exhibition. The aim, though, is that we do leave something useful, such as the ingredients for a potential heritage product or service, like I mentioned, from these narratives. Now, a brief word about the EMPATHS project. We have a website, and I'll give you a QR code to that at the end of the presentation. But if you go onto the website, you will find a fair amount already of results publications that we have posted there. There are various reports from the research phase, and there's also copies of the EMPATHS manifesto that I mentioned, which is I'd recommend that, as it sets out the case for participation from the standpoints of the local community, of activists, of a heritage manager, of heritage professionals and policymakers, in a really nicely succinct way. It also captures, in a nutshell, the values that guide EMPATHS. So more about the project later. But I just wanted now to focus a little bit on participation. Participation, co-creation, there are words that we use all the time, and sometimes it's useful to reflect on, where this came from. So despite the best efforts to the contrary in some parts of the world, the democratization process still pervades and encourages the involvement of citizens, where an individual's voice matters, obviously to different extents, but experts are no longer on pedestals. There's a keener sense of accountability. There are also social movements human rights, and for diversity, environmental justice, for example, the rights of indigenous people, LGBTQ plus movements as well. So it's really opening up. There's also, with this opening up, the rise of a participatory culture where we're all becoming creators and contributors to culture through digital technology, social media, other platforms, etc. When we're talking about participation, are we really involved despite all of those movements that I just mentioned? Are we really involved? There are levels of participation that are actually non-participation. You may know this diagram. This is from Sherry Arnstein, and it's a model that we use in Interpret Europe in our training program, because we're also adapting our training program to promote the participation of people, of visitors to heritage sites, to get the dialogue going. So there's at the very bottom of the ladder, it's not really interpretation. It's just really more about power holders keeping control. In the middle, there's areas or levels of tokenistic participation. Yeah, we're consulting with you, but not really listening. It's still this perhaps fear of relinquishing control that is really the challenge, and that's the part in the top section there, where people are really being allowed to have a say in decision making. And what the heritage sector faces is really, in general, is overcoming the challenge or fear for professionals to give up traditional control from authorities, being authorities of knowledge and understanding, to sharing that knowledge and understanding. So when we consider participatory heritage interpretation, well, people are no longer passive consumers of interpretation, controlled by historians, curators, or site managers, but they can contribute their perspectives and experiences. And if people are allowed to contribute, even co-create, well, then they're more likely to relate to a site or a place because it means something to them personally. And they might actually be more inclined to feel a sense of belonging strong enough to preserve it, protect it, to be a kind of guardian in a way. And that could be from joining a volunteer group to maintaining it, or having their say in a consultation about a site. So participation is fundamental to, as you can see with the interpretive triangle here, and the 4 qualities that are underpinning it. This is taken from the Interpret Europe training program, which is surely familiar to some of you. And it's been developed by Interpret Europe, where we're inviting and facilitating interpretation by the people, not for the people. So it applies, this also applies to when you visit a site, but also for a community getting involved in creating a new heritage experience. Sarah Court, in one of our lectures this week, said that experts have a voice, but now we gather voices. So we're gathering many narratives, and when we do that, that makes for the best interpretation, as she said. Now, participation isn't new. As I said, it already exists in places in North America, also in Australia, where particularly around the rights of indigenous people. But it demands more time. It demands more resources for really to get above that non-tokenistic participation. And it means loosening the control of a predetermined process and a result. And we all know that while that takes a lot of effort, it's worth it, because it leads to better ownership and sustainability once you, as a heritage professional, have to move on to other things. So Participatory heritage interpretation helps us to reveal and consider different perspectives of the same story or multiple stories about the same site, as well as intangible heritage as well. So when we do that, we're broadening our horizons in a kind of hermeneutics kind of way with new experiences. We're understanding and appreciating, but not necessarily agreeing. It's just simply that we appreciate that there are other points of view, other perspectives. And when we're doing that, we're also improving our interpretive literacy, so our ability to interpret the world around us. And then also when we do that, we're becoming an actor in creating and shaping understanding than simply receiving it. So most of you will probably know what heritage interpretation or interpretation is, but I always feel it's useful just to have a quick look back at this. So interpretation is really about helping people make sense of something. What does that mean to me? And just an example, last night, when I looked out of the window, the wind was beginning to rise. It was gusting. The air started to feel a bit cooler. There were some dark clouds on the horizon. So that meant to me that a storm was coming. So I took the information and I interpreted based on experience. But unfortunately, the interpretation was erroneous because finally a storm didn't appear and it just all blew away and we're back to 35 degrees of heat again. So there was a bit of hope, but it was dashed. However, it's just an example to show you that we're natural born interpreters. We do it from our very first breath, the moment we enter into this life, and we're always interpreting everything around us. We're doing it now. So we assemble the facts and we understand the consequences of those facts. So it's also an individual process. So we can interpret a tree or a boulder, as you may have done if you've done a course on interpretation. We can all look at the same tree and take something different from it, interpret it differently. So when we apply that to heritage interpretation, well, heritage interpretation helps people make sense of heritage. And heritage being what we inherit from earlier generations and keep for future generations. But in deciding to value something enough to preserve it, that itself is an act of interpretation. So in a way, if there wasn't interpretation, there wouldn't be any heritage. So this is heritage in action. It's basically a bunch of people here figuring out what we are seeing, what we are experiencing here at a medieval village, just a stone's throw from where I live. There are different perspectives being discussed here to form the story, based on our knowledge, but also what we're seeing. We're interpreting, and we're using our knowledge and experiences to build a story here together with people from different generations, students. There's a lecturer there, but there's also members of the local community. And we're all looking at different things as well, not necessarily always at the person speaking. But are we just telling stories? Well, maybe we are. And a good story, as you know, can enthrall people. It can move them emotionally. It can change perspectives. Stories are actually quite manipulative when you think about it, because they have the power to change people's emotions, really grab you. A story can be a tool to help people connect with a place, but heritage interpretation helps us understand what it means for us based on the information available. And all of that is in an effort to understand or to answer the question that I said earlier about, so what? Why should this place matter to me? Why should I care? A story is a stepping stone to interpretation, but not necessarily interpretation itself. So Often when I try to tell people I'm a heritage, I'm an interpreter, I'm a heritage interpreter, they say, "Oh, you tell stories." Unfortunately, that's sort of still an inevitable consequence, but at least it's a starting point, and then you can enlighten them a little bit. Now, when we take that participatory approach to heritage interpretation, imagine all those heads together, all those experiences, all that knowledge and understanding, in addition to making heritage more meaningful to people, which is the first goal of heritage interpretation. We can also reach a bit further to make people more mindful about our future together. Because heritage isn't frozen in time. It's not a dusty relic. It has relevance for us now and for our future. Such as here I live on the edge of Provence, and at the moment with the heat wave, people are getting increasingly concerned about water resources. And around us, there are ancient water collection systems, underground systems, and distribution systems. And I know, you have them in your countries as well. Not only for drinking water for people, but also irrigation water for farming. And how relevant that is today when we're considering how to deal with heat waves that we're enduring frequently now in France, but also elsewhere in Europe. So heritage in that case is not just gathering dust. People are looking at what we did in past times and considering how relevant it is and what lessons it can teach us for the future, which is quite challenging at the moment. So we have strategic documents such as the Faro Convention, which promotes a wider understanding of heritage and its relationship to communities and societies. And while it's part of this democratization of heritage, we still need experts and authorities to be involved in decisions about status and conservation. But it's really healthy and helpful to have the consideration of new perspectives about how heritage is defined and experienced and conserved from heritage communities. That globally is a positive development, but it means shifting to not only for heritage professionals to not only educate, but also to inform and facilitate this process. You might recognize this person if you go on her Facebook profile. What does somebody like Valentina do? She's still an expert at the Ethnological Museum in Alexandroupolis, but she's adapting, and she now facilitates dialogue to gather multiple narratives, different stories, unheard voices. She needs new skills and competencies to do this safely and effectively as equals with other community stakeholders. And so EMPATHS, through the pilot training experiences that we're organizing, based on the roadmap and the community labs, is trying to provide a certain level of confidence and comfort so that heritage professionals like Valentina and community stakeholders can do this with levels of trust and in a safe space. And we're going to explore that in September. So it also helps people to know her, but also it breaks down some barriers because she will be taking part in the community lab. Certain people will know her, others won't. But if she was a facilitator, there are certain advantages to being known, to being local, but there are also some drawbacks. People might associate Valentina with a particular position that perhaps the Ethnological Museum might take, or certain perceptions. But if she was an external facilitator, then yes, there's an advantage of perhaps not having that baggage, but also a disadvantage of not knowing the area as intimately as Valentina does. So there are pros and cons for facilitation models and heritage professionals facilitating that process. Now, the roadmap, I talked initially about the participatory roadmap, which is really the core of the EMPATHS training program. The trainees at the moment at the online sessions are currently being introduced to the principles and methods. And then we will practice them in a field-based workshop called a community lab with local community members at a heritage site or place in the month of September. Now, we are trying through all of these steps to foster ownership, a sense of ownership, community ownership to all steps of the roadmap, because what we want to encourage is stewardship and sustainability after the process ends. There are the key steps are really the first step is about knowing what you're dealing with, mapping stakeholders, the community, analysing the heritage. What is it we're dealing with here? Then the second step is about making clear what you want to do, what you will not do. So setting kind of boundaries. The third step is about, well, if you want meaningful contributions from people, you have to give the community the competencies to do this. They're not always equipped to write fantastic heritage narratives that you can instantly include in a panel or an exhibition. But if you give them a short workshop or take them on a site visit to somewhere and encourage them to share their ideas and views about what they're seeing, then this can create that kind of mindset and also encourage them to have the confidence and trust to be able to contribute meaningfully to the process. You're also, in doing this particular step 3, is we're avoiding squeezing local community representatives like a sponge just to get information out of them, that kind of tokenistic part. So we want them to be involved meaningfully. The fourth stage is interpreting together. So we're not all experts, we're just meaning making to create narratives that can be used for an eventual talk or a walk or a panel or a trail or an exhibition. And the importance there is really gathering as big a range of voices, those that talk a lot and those that don't talk so much, to get all of the different perspectives and consider them together. The fifth stage is the kind of exit strategy. It's about presenting the findings to the public, evaluating the experience together, and how best to continue. Still, where possible, by trying to provide some support to do it. It's not just a case of walking away and thinking, that's it, job done, and it'll continue. It won't. So, just to sum up then, participation is increasingly an expectation rather than an exception. And with it, the skill sets of heritage professionals have got to adapt accordingly. But there's a lot to be gained by opening up and hearing voices that were unheard, or overcoming professional biases that wittingly or unwittingly might blinker your vision. Heritage belongs to us all. Local communities are sources and guardians of heritage. But we have to recognize that things can change and decisions can be made that might endanger a previously recognized heritage phenomenon. So it's not always, it's a tricky situation, a changing situation. So I couldn't end without sharing some initial insights and echoes that were appreciated from our online training, at least our online training in the Geopark in Austria. And I hope that perhaps some of these points that I've taken from our sessions so far echo with your training as well. So the first one is about participation. Generally, a lot of participants felt it was more like an isolated action rather than a complete process. So in the participatory roadmap, participation tended to be used in the first 3 steps of the roadmap, but it was often tokenistic from thereafter, where you were creating meaning together and evaluating together. Often in the evaluation process, the sponsor of the community project might take back the evaluation and do it for themselves, often ignoring local communities who've been involved. It's also about maybe turning a demand into an opportunity. So an organization or an institution might have a project that they must or they to develop. But if you take that demand to the local community in the language of the institution, it doesn't sound particularly appealing. A heritage trail must be developed, or an audio guide must be developed for this exhibition. Well, if you turned it around and made it into an opportunity for people and invited local community to be involved, then you would have a better chance of people contributing to it and enriching all of the ingredients for your interpretation. But it's no longer your interpretation, it's a collective interpretation. Also, if we want interpretation, we shouldn't go full steam ahead to encourage it, because we may just overwhelm community stakeholders. Remember, a lot of these people are volunteers. They're doing it out of their own goodwill if they get involved at all. And so to ask too much of them too quickly would overwhelm them and have the opposite effect. So go easy on community participation, but give them the tools to make a meaningful contribution. So run these workshops, organize these site visits, and give some talks so that they feel part of the process. And then the process of participation is also about asking questions and not necessarily just focusing or to rush to find solutions. Of course, when you ask the questions, you're opening things up, and that might introduce extra time and extra resources. But we need to try to allow for that to happen. And one thing that in a lecture that I picked up from Vangelis here was, leave your ego at home. It's their project, not yours. And that is really important, especially if you want the local community stakeholders to continue the project after you move on. Because if they define it as, oh, it's your project, then there's not going to be much incentive for them to invest time and effort to continue. But if they feel that sense of ownership, where you contributed your ideas, but essentially you've crafted it's essentially their ideas, their narratives, their idea for an interpreted service or product, then it has a much better chance of sustaining in the future. And the last area that we touched on is creating space for dialogue. So it's not their space or your space, it's a shared space around making heritage a shared space for dialogue. And this last slide, I just wanted to share with you because I felt that it was something that was probably one of the most challenging observations that we made, of this interface between professional codes of you as heritage professionals, the rules, principles, and practices that you have as heritage professionals, and then the interests and values of the local community. Sometimes there can be glaring gaps, and it's knowing how to balance, finding that balance between perhaps objective knowledge that you might bring, but also subjective understanding that the people, that local communities have about stories that they want to share, even if the authenticity of some of these stories might be questionable. So there's a task to negotiate a kind of balance here. And I think that was one of the main challenges that people really identified with during the online sessions. And it will be a challenge during the community labs. So this is going to involve a kind of adaptation to a process so that we're working as closely as possible together as equals with mutual respect. So that's just some observations from our community lab and from our online training that will be relevant for our community lab. I think I've talked enough. In fact, probably more longer than I expected, but I'd be really interested, firstly, to hear from you online, but also from the summer school students there, if any of those insights strike a chord with your experience during the summer school or your experience in general away, and also just to invite thoughts and experiences from those joining us online. Thank you very much.
We unmuted ourselves for another round of applause.
Okay, thank you for the students for joining.
Okay. I think we will take comments or questions from our online participants first, as we gather our thoughts and questions here.
What about Lena and Aris in the summer school? Did you, with some of the points that were raised in the online sessions, did they make any connection with your experience in the summer school during the consultation process that the students were involved in with the local community members?
Definitely, but I see Dimitris Ioannidis has raised a hand. Is that right?
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Dimitris. Nice
Hello
to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. It was fascinating to hear you talk so calmly. And I am participating to the EMPATHS project in Greece. And as you said, on Monday, it will be our sixth and final session. And I will also be attending the community lab in Alexandroupolis. I have a question. I don't know if it is a question, maybe it's a comment that I did not quite understand, and I'm not so sure I understand. You said that without interpretation, heritage wouldn't exist. Now, can we expand a little bit on that? Because it sounds quite a powerful comment. Thank you.
Well, firstly, what would be your particular view there, Dimitris?
I have been thinking of it since you said it up until the end of your presentation. And I don't know. I feel that it is quite authoritative. Maybe we are overestimating ourselves, if we could call ourselves interpreters, heritage interpreters. And but on the other hand, I see the point that you're trying to make is that if something is there and we don't know what it is it, or we don't have the tools for presenting it to ourselves or to people, But then again, we are living in the 21st century. 10 centuries ago, there was heritage, but people didn't know it was heritage.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not so sure I have a
Yeah.
complete round opinion on this. So maybe we can hear others talk about it.
Uh-huh. I have a we can I'd really enjoy an exchange on this, but just a brief response to you there. I mean, there's I guess amongst what we have around us, we have to make choices in the end because if we kept everything, it's simply not possible. So choices have to be made. And behind those choices is a conversation about what we value and consider important enough to be preserved compared to something that we consider, well, that's if that disappears, well, that's so be it. So it's almost as if choices have to be made, and they have been made over time. And and as you say, it's interesting that there's heritage around us now being created. It's yesterday's newspaper could be potentially heritage. It's a Rubik's cube. It's a 2CV. You know, it's it's not necessarily heritage as we appreciate it traditionally, and it's useful to have that conversation between people to share what they consider important about something and may be important enough that it should be preserved. So I guess it was a bit of a provocative statement, but if we are good heritage interpreters, then we like a bit of provocation as well. But I invite thoughts from the room and from other people online about that.
If I may, the view from Paros, and I think this is something that our participants as well might want to chip into the conversation for. Last night, for example, in the presentations that the groups made, we've heard of local heritage that is, yes, it has existed before we noticed it or before somebody else noticed it in the community, but it has existed in different forms or in different manifestations. One good example is the example of Spolia, from that one team in this summer school was interested in. Spolia, for those of you who don't know, are archaeological parts that have been reused in modern buildings.
Oh, yes.
Well, in the research of one team in this summer school, I think the participants found that both the uses, the interpretations, the values, and the way people thought about these remnants of the ancient past were incredibly different. And when we approach this as a phenomenon in general, we can't just offer one interpretation. So it is not just the archaeological aspect of the spolia, that it was somewhere in the past and now it's in the present, and we need to preserve it as something of the ancient past. Even this is very problematic because, for example, in Parikia, in Paros, there is one spolio which is probably Hellenistic engraving. On that engraving, there is another date, 1670, and that spolio is interred in a modern world. So even in an archaeological sense, how can you date this? Is it Hellenistic? Is it 17th century? Or is it 20th, 21st century? it's the same with the things that with the values that local people or visitors attribute to even material heritage, tangible heritage that is in a way can be said to have an ontological existence prior to interpretation. Even so, it's interpretation widely taken that gives it a manifestation. That's the way they exist, I think. I'm not sure if I'm summarizing well the and the other aspect is with intangible heritage, for example, that we need to take into account the actions of people, interpreters or local experts, or local communities in general, to bring this heritage into existence somehow, to make it, to define it. So another theme here focused on food in Paros. In Paros, there is no, for example, local food. There is no one dish that will that represents the island somewhat. And yet, when the participants in this team made the research, they realized that there is a very strong connection for local inhabitants, but also visitors, to particular produce or particular dishes on the island that they connect somewhat with their experience of being in Paros. And this is perhaps something that is not, monolithic or unique for the entire island, but it is something that has not been brought into the spotlight. So the effort of a expert, a heritage, or someone who works in heritage, or someone who's interested in heritage, might not be an expert in the strict sense. This activity is something that, in a way, makes this thing appear. It highlights it, and this action of highlighting it creates somehow further activity on this heritage. So we tend to think, am I right? Okay, good. So we tend to think of heritage as something that is very it's in process. It's not something that exists and we sort of make it something. It's something that both exist. It's like Schrodinger's cat. It doesn't exist and it exists at the same time. It depends on your looking into the box whether this is something or not. So this is, I think, I'm sorry I spoke for about half
No,
an hour, but
I'll just give a quick response to the couple of points that you made there, Aris. First of all, the built heritage, for example, and the reuse, repurposing of historic materials into new buildings. That's a special area I really like, particularly. I see it around me now, but I always remember I did a certified interpretive guide course in Athens, and one of the participants, these were for French participants, and one of them chose a cathedral. I can't remember exactly. We were very close to the center, and her interpretation was it took 60 churches to build this. The stone from 60 churches was used to build this cathedral. So it was sort of repurposing, and the stones were literally used from churches, taken down, and then made used to make this cathedral. But buildings are often, as you said, they're in constant evolution. They're palimpsests that they are layers. You peel back the layer and you find something different because through time they have evolved, just like castles. Bits have been added on, and the buildings can change dramatically from what they originally were, just according to the people that lived in them, the uses that were needed. So they follow the values and evolution of the people, the local community, if you like. And I particularly like the fact that you can find Roman remains in the doorway of a house here in France, where somebody has said, "That's a really nice piece of stone. I know exactly where I'm going to put that." And that, but in a way, the stone is still there, and there's a story to tell from it. With the intangible heritage, you mentioned food. Well, it made me think of making coffee as well. How coffee can be a ritual in many countries. It's not just going to Starbucks or whatever. There's much more to when you make a cup of coffee and share it with someone. So there's also realities on the island, for example, that you mentioned, of perhaps realities for people who want to make a living out of the heritage, and in a way keeping that authenticity so that it doesn't, like a food stuff doesn't become just a commercial product that has lost its roots. I'm sure most people see that, but there's always the danger with a commercial operation that perhaps the food is taken in a different direction, and it would be a useful area for a heritage professional to engage with local communities about the value and the future of a food that they would like to promote. How would they like to promote it, to guard its authenticity and its history, but do it in a respectful way, but yet allows them to continue to make a living just as generations before on the island did. So these are perhaps areas where I come back to that point I made about a position of a heritage professional might be quite different from what a local community wants, but it's finding that middle ground to sort of negotiate and look at all of the different perspectives of that food, for example, and then come to a kind of a conclusion, a shared conclusion about the importance and the value of that food and how it can be promoted for the island and still have a heritage value.
Thank you, Sandy. We have a question from the crowd here. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Sara, and it's nice to see that there is some Croatian colleagues here too. I wanted to ask because, how do you overcome the language barrier? Because I have an impression that you cannot get fully trusted if you have a translator next to you, and that sometimes the local community, especially the older ones, feel like they're being not observed, but in a sense, like you're standing there and you're looking at them and listening to a translator. I mean, you work in this international community there, and how do you approach it? Because I think you need time to build trust, but you don't have this time always. So
Sandy, you're muted.
Your microphone, Sandy.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's inevitable. Just coming thinking about the language. Obviously, from my position, English is my mother tongue. So in lots of different positions, I've had the luxury of being able to teach and run workshops in English. However, I think if I was not so aware or able, and I had this sort of language barrier, I think it's simply being in the local community to have meetings and encounters, organize exchanges with people. I remember once doing a writing course, no, a guiding course in Norway, and I arrived a couple of days early, and I went around the local community, and I was this strange guy looking in people's gardens, looking at spending an unusual amount of time gazing at a monument or in a square or down by the port. Um, and I had local a local person with me who could introduce me to people, but it was just asking questions that what I was doing. I was wanting to find out. So already I was showing that I was curious, and that actually broke down a lot of barriers because people instantly, and most people are very happy to share stories and tell stories. So I can't overcome the language barrier unless I have a local colleague, for example. But it's simply perhaps the attitude I took, that I was curious about their heritage, their environment, and I wanted to find out about it. And when you do that, people are very willing to share. Most people are very willing to share stories with you, even in their own garden. When I found out that a greenhouse in a man's garden had been made from the old windows from the local cinema, the first cinema in the village, that was eventually renovated, and he had used the windows to make a greenhouse that now sat in his garden. So he had a bit of heritage in his garden. I hope I've maybe not answered your question directly, but at least gone some of the way anyway.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, just to intervene, because you raised the point that we've been discussing a lot here in the summer school. You know, very often, I mean, we have the language barrier, right? We have English, mostly, I mean, we communicate in English, and then we have Greek-speaking participants who try to mediate and interpret, and we do the same. But in general, English is the predominant language, but not everybody speaks English here. So from the very beginning, when we start, we always try to encourage everybody, and we give a lot of time for that, to wander around in a structured or unstructured way in order to observe around them, feel the place, try to understand, you know, where they are, sort of place their gaze on whatever they find intriguing or interesting or unknown or maybe familiar, you know. So this takes time, and it's very often perceived as unstructured, as if, what am I doing here? I'm just looking around. Okay, what's, you know, and then suddenly, after a while, it all comes and clicks.
Yeah.
And it can be, yeah, very overwhelming. But at the same time, even if you speak the language, I think it's part of understanding where you are. Exactly because we keep saying that there is a lot more beyond the linguistic aspect of communication. And that's why we dedicate a lot of time in doing ethnographic observations, walks, talks, note-taking on different ways, not just writing, for example. It can be visual, it can be sound. And then apparently it all synthesizes our landscape, the way each one of us perceive the landscape, and then collectively, how do we perceive our experience here?
Lena, I think I love that type of the process, because we're all heritage interpreters are often sort of amateur detectives. You know, that you arrive in a place and you instantly try to make sense of it. I'm always doing that. I'm looking at maps. I'm looking at features on maps that look strange to me or interesting, and I will go and visit them. And then when I'm there, I'm piecing together the structure of the place, where the positions of buildings, of different features, and creating a picture. It actually might not be the absolute truth, but it's what makes sense to me.
Exactly.
And then that's a first level. And then the next level is the luxury of having maybe a meeting with a local resident to give you that second level of detail. And sometimes it might confirm what you've already said because we're fairly sensible people. You know, if I don't know, there's a church or a square, you know, it's there for a reason or a monument. We can figure out whether perhaps it's a war monument or perhaps it was a local disaster or something, and then we know that there's a story behind there, but we need the extra level of resource for it. So that's the beauty of heritage interpretation. So always carry a notebook or your phone with you to make notes. I'm always doing that.
Like Stephen has been doing for so long. He's been taking notes like of every instance, and he has a question.
So I take a lot of notes. Sandy, thanks so much for your presentation. At the end of your presentation, you've shared a key takeaway, which really resonates with me around the tension or the relationship in balancing objective with subjective.
Yeah.
And also, there seems to be a relationship between, and not necessarily correlated, but another sort of similar relationship between the sort of perhaps the funding end of a partnership and perhaps the delivery end or the local community end of a partnership. And so that's certainly something that I have worked through in different ways. And I'm just wondering if there was perhaps more that you could share on how that has played out in your experiences, perhaps how that sort of negotiation, what you have found to be either successful or perhaps yet to be explored, and how that might, result or how it might have finished in those scenarios.
I've not so much experience in that area because I've tended to be involved in more of the training, but also just sort of small consultation jobs where I'm sort of creating interpretive content. But I do recognize that often if you have an organization that's funding something that has decided they're going to fund a project to create an exhibition or something on Paris, for example. They've got their sort of deadlines and constraints, but if you want something that is tenable in the future and sustainable, then it's best where possible to involve the local community in the delivery of it. But then when you're doing that, you're opening up a lot of variables. And so the time can slip, the resources might be eaten up by, organizing extra meetings and things like that. And of course, it's extra time if you're the heritage professional who is working on this. So that's the dilemma of and what we did in the first couple of sessions of the online training was how can we state the case for the importance of participation so that it is not just purely tokenistic, that how can we argument it in particular ways that decision makers can see the value of it, that what they will get out of it will be infinitely more rich and rewarding, fulfilling for everybody than simply tasking you to go away and create an exhibition coming from, the information you have without particularly talking to other people. I'm sure you could do a fantastic job, but would it, would the local community may appreciate it as well, but would they see themselves in it and would they gain that sense of ownership? And I think it comes around to this sort of short-termism thinking of a lot of organizations to just do something. It's ticking a box, but it's often wasted money and wasted resources. So part of the training is looking at ways of reinforcing the argument for participation towards funders and sponsors of projects. So it's changing mindsets a bit, and that's quite a long and challenging process. But I'm afraid that's my sort of rather garbled answer to your very pertinent question. But it's
Very
a
helpful.
tough one.
Thank you.
I see in the chat as well, there's a question. Can you see that?
Yes.
I
From
very
my
much.
schedule.
Yeah. I just wonder, in our world of conflict, pollution, climate change, species loss, and loss of heritage in general, that we also need somehow to influence communities to talk about any problems they face and include it in their interpretation. Yeah. Yeah, this is really sort of, bottom up involvement. And I think it relates a little bit back to what I had said earlier about professional biases, where you might have an organization with a particular role or mission, and they can overlook a particular story or preoccupation from the local community. Sarah Court mentioned this in her lecture, I think it was in Zimbabwe, about an organization that wanted to do an interpretation about a site, but was completely missing the point from the local community about maybe the spiritual dimension of a site. But yeah, it's these issues of say climate change and species loss can be spoken about by institutions and organizations in rather general terms, but it is far more valuable and impactful if local communities are able to voice their experiences about these challenges that they're facing, that we're all facing now, and to do it in a constructive way where accusations are not being thrown around, but more just these questions that interrogate people, that interrogate their positions, that can influence their behavior. So it's asking those questions. And I think that's probably a good way to go about it. The rhetorical questions, the open-ended questions, where there's no right answer, but you're just asking the question and inviting people to reflect and consider. And sometimes that reflection can go on after they visited a site or a place, and then sometimes influence their behavior thereafter. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure many of you there, you have your own opinions, and I don't want to just you to dwell on mine. Rula, I can see you on my screen. Have we got any other questions or points people want to share from the room?
I think we are stretching people's patience.
Yeah.
The discussion is great. Just
Okay.
we have one final, perhaps, comment from Paros, from outlook of Paros?
Based actually on this last question, because here in Paris, all these issues are raised by community groups, by citizens' initiatives in regards of mass tourism, the loss of natural resources, the economic pressure, loss of local economies, lack of support in artisanal crafts, let's say, fishing, etc. But on the other hand, as we've been discussing all these 2 weeks, this island is an amazing example of having organized initiatives on all levels. So you find institutional you find institutions like official institutions who deal with that, but also you have smaller local initiatives. You have people who just volunteer on a common cause, and they do have meetings. They meet regularly to address these issues. And also, this is something that came up, always comes up through our participants' interviews here. And we try to invite people to talk as guest speakers about this and show, who the local stakeholders are and what are the main issues that they have to deal with. So, I guess conflict, when one works with communities, is something inherent. And I don't think that we can be talking ever about doing research in a harmonious community. And this is what we're trying to show here, that the interests are always conflicting, in the sense that if you have the top-down approach, if you have big institutions, funders, etc., if you have small initiatives, they always have something different to promote or to protect. And we have to navigate around it. So we even constitute a small community here as a summer school, right? And then each group separately is an even smaller community, each group of participants. So if you don't understand that conflict is inherent, but then what do you do with it if you are sort of working for a common cause, right? And a common understanding of things, then I think that it's sort of idealizing the situation, but without actually realizing what we have to deal with. And it resonates with a lot of what you said in your presentation about how to approach communities, how to leave our egos behind. So you have to be very conscious working in such an environment, I think, of who you are and what you want to achieve working with other people, because it's collaborative work, either with your own team or with the community members or the groups and initiatives that you come across. So it's a work that happens on all levels, from the very personal to the very, very top institutional and everything else that comes in between.
Lena, it's exactly what communities, when you're doing community work, community consultation, there you got a heart for your.
Yeah.
It's very interesting what you bring up there. It's just, communities are very complex anyway, and even in the geopark where I'm teaching, we have traditional members of the community, families that have been there for generations, and we also have people that are newcomers. They came with the mining. They came to work in the mines there. The mines have since closed, and they're literally just maybe one generation in, and they have a completely different relationship with the local area. So there's plenty of potential for conflicting opinions about the established families that, well, we know the area, this is our place often, and unfortunately that happened here in the town that I lived, which had local elections recently, and there was this schism between established families. We are from here and you are not, and it's the worst type of thing that can happen. So what you mentioned there, just at the end, I noted down, you said common cause. And those are the things that can bring people together. So we don't have to necessarily agree with each other. And as it's been said many times, conflict can be positive, can be a positive thing. We shouldn't shy away from it. But it's often helpful to remind people of those common causes, of moving to the meta level, so that even if people have conflicting opinions, that they can see that ultimately we are all wanting the same thing. So it's a bit like an interpretive theme, or using those universal concepts that everyone can identify with, and that's often a way of breaking through the conflictual situations, to bring the level up, so that people can see, okay, even if I'm different from this person, we actually want the same things.
Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting, really engaging. Yeah, I think we're all happy here. So it was very nice having you with us, Sandy, and everybody attending online.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for summer school students there for getting up after a tough, I think, a long and day yesterday. So enjoy the rest of the day today, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It was really nice to have this conversation, and
It was a pleasure.
I like the way that the conversations, when we're talking about local communities, can go in any direction, just as when we are doing local community work. You never know what's going to happen. And that's one of the beauties of it. Keeps you on your toes, but we one experience is never the same from the next.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sandy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. All the best. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
guys. See you.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Thank you.